Hey there, and welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving right into a mind-blowing journey backward through deep time, relying on the incredible integrity of evolutionary science to guide us. We're looking at a concept that literally connects you directly to the absolute dawn of our planet. It's an epic story of endurance, and it's written entirely in your DNA.
So, how far back does your family tree really go? When we think about our ancestors, most of us can maybe name our grandparents, or, if we're super lucky, our great-grandparents. Some of you might have even gone down that genealogical rabbit hole and traced your lineage back a few centuries. We're so used to thinking of human history in terms of just hundreds or maybe a few thousand years, but as we'll see, the scientific reality of your lineage, it's infinitely more epic than that.
Just take a second to wrap your head around this quote. You are the living ancestor of an unbroken chain of lives stretching to the very first life forms that appeared around 4 billion years ago. The simple, undeniable fact that you exist right now, listening to this, proves that. You are literally the result of a flawless 4 billion year survival streak. Now pressure, right? Just imagine it as this continuous, unbroken chain of your ancestral mothers, stretching all the way back through the eons.
Okay, moving into our first major era, narrow escapes of ancient humans. If we rewind the clock right past modern civilization, we find our ancestors living as hunter-gatherers in Africa. And man, mere existence back then was a daily, brutal battle.
Our early ancestors faced some absolutely insane environmental bottlenecks. I mean, your direct ancestors survived a supervolcano eruption so massive that it literally dimmed the sun for 6 whole years. Think about that. Plus, they endured these brutal, cold, dry glacial periods. To make it through meant surviving birth, avoiding rampant diseases without modern medicine, securing food in practically barren landscapes, and keeping themselves alive just long enough to rear their young. Just doing that over and over and over again.
Because of those immense pressures, the total global human population is estimated to have dwindled down to a mere 10,000 people. Seriously, just 10,000. Actually, some estimates say it was even lower. It really highlights the extreme fragility of our early existence. But out of that tiny group fighting the harsh elements, your ancestors were the ones who made it.
And hey, the climate wasn't even the only threat. These early human hunter-gatherers were sharing the African savannas with prehistoric megafauna. We were this tiny, vulnerable population trying not to get hunted by saber-toothed cats. We were living alongside absolute behemoths like giant gorilla horses, yes, that was a real thing, and giant sloths the size of elephants. Your ancestors had to outsmart and outrun these formidable creatures every single day just to see tomorrow.
Which brings us to our next section, mammals and the meteorite. We are breaking the species barrier now, zooming right past human civilization entirely and plunging headfirst into deep evolutionary time.
Tracing that timeline even further back, before we were early humans, we shared common ancestors with the great apes. Then, we hit a massive, planet-altering milestone, the meteorite that wiped out the dinosaurs. Your ancestors were the resilient, scrappy creatures that survived that apocalyptic impact. If we go back 100 million years, we find the last common ancestor of humans and mice, taking us right back to the very first mammals. Believe it or not, that tiny, scurrying, shrew-like animal is your great-great-great, well, add a few million greats on there, grandmother.
Okay, let's accelerate our reverse chronological zoom a bit into our next section, tracing back to first cells. We're moving past those early mammals, stepping out of the prehistoric forests and diving right back into the ancient oceans.
Before those shrew-like mammals, we trace our unbroken line back to the very first reptiles. Before them, our ancestors were amphibians, the ones who first bravely crawled onto land. Before that, they were fish swimming in primordial seas, evolving from even earlier marine vertebrates. Your family tree isn't just rooted in the earth, it's deeply fundamentally rooted in the ocean.
And we can deconstruct these complex animal bodies even further back. We trace back to the very first animals to develop a heart and a circulatory system. Before that, our ancestors were basically worm-like creatures that pioneered bilateral symmetry. Having a left and a right side. Before that, the very first animals to develop distinct nerves and muscles. And earlier still, we were these simple, sponge-like creatures, developing the very first different kinds of bodily tissues. And finally, we reach the microscopic dawn. Before complex multicellular organisms, we were just single cells. Then, the earliest complex oxygen-breathing cells. Before that, the very first rudimentary cells, pretty much like modern bacteria.
Until finally, roughly 4 billion years ago, we arrive at the absolute genesis, the moment when mixtures of inert chemicals first became self-replicating molecules. That right there is where your story begins, unbroken, uninterrupted, for 4 billion years. Every single one of those microscopic entities, those sponges, those fish, and those shrew-like mammals, they all fought for survival, and they won.
All right, let's snap back to the present day for our final section, Earth's Living Museum. We've literally traveled 4 billion years in just a few minutes, and the implications of this epic, shared timeline are profoundly important. Earth is a living museum of all the life we know about so far in the entire universe. When you really lean into the integrity of the information we've covered, you realize this unbroken chain doesn't just apply to you and me. It applies to the trees outside your window, the birds in the sky, even the microscopic life in the soil. Every single living thing currently on our planet is the correct reigning champion of its own 4 billion years survival streak. We are all structurally deeply connected to eons of creatures that simply refuse to die out.
Which leads to an absolutely crucial takeaway from our source material. I think it is important that we preserve as much of this biodiversity as possible. When you truly internalize that every single species on Earth is the culmination of an unimaginably long, brutally difficult struggle to exist, their value suddenly becomes infinite, doesn't it? Protecting this incredible variety of life isn't just about standard conservation. It's about respecting a 4 billion-year legacy of survival that we are incredibly lucky to share this planet with.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought. What will you do to protect our 4 billion-year legacy? It's just wild to think about the complex web of life that led right up to this exact moment. You are a walking, breathing miracle of deep time. Take that knowledge with you today and maybe look at the natural world around you with just a little bit more awe. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep exploring and keep marveling at the unbelievable science of our existence.